Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is.
Dennis Broe.
And Dennis, you've been up to a lot since we last spoke, but I guess the thing that's most exciting is a new installment in your renowned detection series. And it comes to us, at least in this discussion, on a day when a lot of us are thinking about LA and Hollywood and Mike Davis. And that's because of the terrible fires in a place we love and loathe, but most of all, love.
Yes, and also loathe. Um, so even today, it's still necessary. But yes, it's very sad. And yeah, I go to Los Angeles once a year for a month. This year will be 2 months. And they're evacuating Santa Monica, and my home is on the edge of Santa Monica. So I might be, if I were there, I might be evacuating. So yes, it's very sad to watch this. When you say the thing about, LA brings up the whole thoughts of the environment. And the
Yeah,
next trilogy, the third book in the next trilogy, perhaps the second book in the next trilogy is about the environment. Because, the word smog came from LA. It was a morning in 1943 when people woke up and found themselves just like they find themselves today, covered in soot. And it had never dawned so much on people that the pollution had caused this. So smog is a combination of smoke and fog, and that's what LA became known for. But these kinds of things, environmental catastrophes, it was very clear by 1943 that this was on the agenda and something had to be done about it. And here we are, finally now, now it's an apocalypse, and it's very sad. It's very sad to watch it.
I mentioned Mike Davis, and of course, he wrote a book or two about LA and fire. And yeah, a friend of mine whom I used to work with has evacuated to downtown from what Angelinos insist on pronouncing as Los Feliz. And another friend of mine is fleeing to Germany if she can get out. I
Mm,
mean, it's terrifying
yeah, it
at a
is.
personal level, but at a collective level, it's really something. And I guess that's one of the things that I think is so, I was going to say fetching, but that sounds slightly twee, so powerful in your writing is the ability to move between the individual, the personal, the story, and the macro setting.
Well, thank you. I mean, I always try to do that, and I begin with an industry, and that's the heart of what I'm always writing about. And so the current book, The Dark Ages, is about the Hollywood industry in 1951. Now, of course, on the surface, it's all about uh, the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, that part of McCarthyism, that was so vicious, coming to Hollywood, issuing about 400 subpoenas to various, mostly writers, but also actors. Not very many directors. The Directors Guild kind of, protected themselves and never really went along with any of this. But the writers and actors were issued these subpoenas, and as I said, 400, and about two-thirds of them refused to testify, which meant immediate blacklisting, which is sort of amazing, actually, in terms of the number of people who refused, knowing that as soon as they stepped out of that star chamber, they were toast. Well, what were they going to do? Because they were no longer going to work in the industry. Many of them used fronts, but a lot of the fronts were used before, not after. Once you had been in front of the committee, you were fairly public, and you were being watched. So it took a lot of guts, took a lot of courage to oppose this, this as as England and Supler calls it, Inquisition in Hollywood, and that's what it was. Staged, by the way, at this point by the Democrats, by Georgia House of Representative member John Wood. And as I point out, there's a chapter I'm doing a reading of it now for Pacifica Radio. So it'll be on in about a week, and it's where the writer goes before HUAC, and well, I'll give it away a little bit. At the end of the chapter, he says, Harry says, well, because you think he might testify. I'm not going to say what happens, but at the end of it, he brings Harry in Griffith Park to this prison that's being built there. And he says, over $1 million has been appropriated to restart concentration camps, including the camps that were used for the Japanese, and to build new ones. And the that bill was passed by two Democratic senators, one of them being Senator Hubert Humphrey, noted liberal, you know. So
Well, and wasn't Bobby Kennedy an investigator for HUAC?
he was. I don't think he did the major work. Richard Stripling was the one who whispered in the ears of John Wood, and Richard Stripling was a Nixon guy, from the beginning. So he did a lot of it. By the way, there is a new book which I'm ordering now. It's about J. Edgar Hoover and Hoover's relationship to HUAC, actually, and to Hollywood and to Hollywood censorship. So that should be very interesting, actually. Someone who's really gone into the FBI case files. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, so there's that. It starts out with these writers, they're using fronts,
Mm.
like Woody Allen's film, The Front. Um, and Harry's hired by one of them because the front split used to be 50-50, where the guy would go, the studio hack would go in, present the script, get it approved, get paid, and then it would be up to him to repay the writer 50%. Okay. Pretty soon, though, they wanted more, and the splits came to be something more like 90-10, 90 for the front and 10 for the screenwriter. And finally, there's the horrible thing where one of the fronts said, "You know what? I'm doing all the work here. You get to sit home in front of a typewriter, and I have to go in and deal with these studio executives." So it
Funny.
got to be pretty crazy. Now, I suppose AI is something like that too. Where AI can say AI is doing all the work now. So we're back in the same situation. I don't know, but anyway, that's what starts Harry on this trail, and
Right.
you know, and so he gets involved with these three writers who are talking, and a thing they like to talk about is the Writers Guild. And it is interesting that when they were in 1947, in the far more notorious investigation, when the writers were called, the Hollywood 10 was called, who eventually went to jail in 1950. Um, they are asked two questions. One is, are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Okay. The second question, though, is, are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Screenwriters Guild? So
Right.
it was pretty upfront what this attack was based on. It was based, okay, if you want to combine them, it was based on communists who were the best labor organizers organizing in Hollywood. And that's what they were afraid of, you know. And so that's so Harry sort of goes to bat for these people, but then they begin dying. And Harry just cannot figure this out. He said, look, first of all, they have no money. Secondly, they have no platform. Why on earth would anyone want to kill them? So that's part of the mystery.
And Dennis, just to give a little bit of context in case, for some obscure reason, people didn't listen to our previous podcast or don't know the series. As you said, this is called The Dark Ages. It's the second part of this trilogy, the Dark Ages trilogy, and it's one of your Harry Palmer series, Harry Palmer Crystal Eckert mysteries. As
Right.
I say, just in case there are folks who are unfamiliar with the series, could you fill them in a little bit
Yeah,
on?
I'll tell you a little
Yeah,
bit about the series. This is the
yeah,
fifth installment.
yeah.
So out of I hope nine, so we're barely halfway through. Yeah, Harry is a disgraced LA cop, a disgraced LA cop from the homicide squad. By the way, he started out on arson and then on burglary. So he knows how to set fires and how to pick locks, because that's what you learn apparently on those on those squads. Now he knows a thing or two about murder too, but but he doesn't do that himself. Um, yes. So he in the first book he goes to set up. He goes to the Hollywood studio actually, asking to be on the security squad, and a member, this guy Moose, recognizes him and promptly kicks him off the studio and says, "You're not wanted here." So he sets up his own investigative, he sets up his own detective agency. And in that first book, he finds this woman, Crystal Eckert, or girl, really. She's 19. She's a club girl, and things are
Right.
deteriorating with her and her dancer partner. They've come to Hollywood from the South to make it, and they're not making it. And more, what their nights look like are sleeping with lower and lower people, lower and lower on the totem pole, trying to get somewhere. So Harry rescues her and makes her his secretary. But she does very, very well. It turns out she has a real knack for investigating. And by the end of the second book, she is also actually a partner. And so that happens. So the first book is about the 47 HUAC, and follows this actor who's a kind of who runs a he's very well known and runs a kind of clearinghouse for left-wing actors. And he may be in some trouble because he may have slept with not only the lead actress, but everyone in her entourage. So he has to figure out, first of all, who he slept with, who the actor slept with, and secondly, what's going on with him and somebody's trying to blackmail him. And that proceeds from there. The second one is called A Hello to Arms. The first one is called Left of Eden. And the second one is called A Hello to Arms, and it's about the arms industry in after World War II, when there is really no foe. You know, you could say the foe was Russia, which was badly damaged and trying to get back on its knees. But there's a huge reinvestment in the arms industry, and Harry gets involved with that because there's a guy who gets damaged during World War II, a black man, and tries to ask Harry to get his, as he says, compensation, so he can retire. So, and Harry gets involved with that, and also with his girlfriend, who's an R&B singer. And Harry loves R&B. It's just starting up, actually, but he's really in love with the music, and pretty soon he's also pretty in love with her. Uh, and The third book is called what's it called? The Precinct with the Golden Arm. And it's about, well, if you're going to write about Los Angeles and the hidden history of Los Angeles, you must write about the LAPD. So this is the LAPD. Each book moves ahead one year. This is the LAPD in 49, and it's about its relationship with the Mexican American community of Boyle Heights, and the relationships are horrible, and drugs are starting to come into the community. And the question is, where are they coming from, and who's distributing them? And Harry, this book also has to do with why Harry had to leave the force, and we find out what happened. The fourth book is called The House That Buff Built. So if you're going to write about Los Angeles after writing about the LAPD, you must write about real estate, because that's the other thing that Los Angeles is, and also the Los Angeles Times. So it's about both of those, actually. And a little town called Torrance, which is a boom town in 1950, and also a town that's extremely unfriendly to anyone who's not white Anglo. And it's about a Chinese woman who's going to wants to live there, and her daughter Lynn, who's a very fiery 17-year-old teenager who says she says she's a Taoist, and Harry says she's always kind of agitated, and she's got her arms up as if she wants to fight. And Harry said, "You don't seem like a Taoist." And she said, "Well, actually, I'm a Taoist and a Maoist." So, and this is 1949, so it's a dangerous time to be that. The second one, and then this book is called The Dark Ages, and it is about this second coming of Hugh to Hollywood. This next book is called Pornocopia, and it's about the porn industry, actually. And there's often a trip in the book. In this book, Harry goes to Cuernavaca because the blacklistees often had to flee the country. So there were kind of three places they went. One was Mexico, and if you had some money that you could get out and take with you, you lived in Mexico City, and you probably lived pretty well. If you didn't have much money at all, you lived in Cuernavaca. So that's where Harry goes because that's where the writer who he's pursuing supposedly lives in Cuernavaca. So there he meets this woman Ninan, who's kind of based on an actress in the Mexican cinema, actually, and he also has an encounter with the Mexican police. And the famous book on Cuernavaca is Under the Volcano, and these these two Mexican cops threatened to push Harry under the volcano. So it does incorporate Malcolm Lowry a little bit, and Malcolm Lowry's uh, descriptions of Cuernavaca are unbelievably great, actually. So I did incorporate some of those also into this. So that's a little bit about what the series is about. Yeah, the next one is called Pornocopia. It's about a moment in the porn industry uh, when the money says, you know what, this is just being run by the mob. It's an extremely profitable thing. Are we going to just let them do this? And Harry goes, Vegas, because this is the moment, because Vegas is run by the mob, but this is charting that moment of the beginning, very beginning tip of the takeover, of the corporate takeover of both Vegas and the porn industry. So, yeah.
And Dennis, there are numerous films that you cite in this wonderful new installment, The Dark Ages, written by people like Dalton Trumbo and Lester Cole, who hightailed it to the state socialist world, of course. But perhaps the most prolific screenwriter you mention is someone who I think is a bit forgotten today.
Yes.
That's John Howard Lawson.
Yep.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about him, because he wasn't just a sort of fellow traveler. He was an organizer and a serious intellectual of the left, I think it's
Yeah.
fair to say. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, and very dangerous, regarded as very dangerous. My friend Gerald Horn wrote a biography of John Howard Lawson called The Last Casualty of the Blacklist, because Lawson was the one who, when things thawed in the 60s, they would never let back into the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Lawson's cardinal sin was not his writing, it was the fact that he organized the Screenwriters Guild, and that's why they hated him. And in 1934, when he called together the writers to organize the meeting, he called them together with the line, "The screenwriter is the creator of the Hollywood film." And that, I can't tell you how um, uh, incendiary that
Yeah.
line
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Producers who are and studios who are holding on to what they've got and who really have been always trying to devalue writers, you know. And as we find out later, Lawson also was not only organizing the screenwriters, but he was also trying to organize all of the writers in the country so that if the screenwriters struck, went on strike, Hollywood would not have anywhere else to pull from.
Yeah.
And it was really threatening, as well as we find out in the book, there's another character. He's called Hank Farrell in the book. He's a labor organizer and a real person. And he was the head of what was called the CSU, Consolidated Studio Unions. In the book, the two of them kind of collaborate, which I made up, but they certainly are close in that, Farrell had wanted the character named Hank Farrell in my book, uh, whose real name is what is his real name? Herb Sorrell, whose real name is Herb Sorrell. And Sorrell had actually wanted to organize all the crafts workers into a single union.
Mm.
And that's why that was the sort of that was the danger that Sorel posed, you know.
So they didn't like vertical unionism. They didn't like horizontal unionism. They didn't like unionism,
That
except
was
when they operated as a cartel, when it was
yes.
just fine.
And they also didn't mind their own studio union.
Right, right, right.
And so that was the head of the studio union is the instigator of the blacklist. They call him the straw man of the Inquisition. And if you wanted to get cleared in Hollywood, you had to go through him. So a pseudonym, if he's in the book, and he's one of the primary characters in the book, actually.
One of the things that people who've never lived in the United States, and particularly have never lived in the big cities, often fail to grasp is the profundity, the density, and the longevity of really powerful radical traditions.
Yes.
That these have never gone away. They've weathered terrible moments like this. They're entering the worst one in our lifetimes, I think it's fair to say.
Well,
And
yeah.
once again, what we
Bill
have
Rudin of the Treasury. Yep.
is, apart from anything else, the equivalent of studio heads, in this case, platform heads, who this time are not saying you can't say this. They're saying you can say anything, including now lying. And we have the vision of Mark Zuckerberg saying, I'm here to work with President Trump against the European governments that are trying to stifle American companies. So, to my mind, this is one of these moments, rather like when the First Amendment was something prized by the left, but has been weaponized by the right. When all those arguments about the liberty to express serious political opinions have turned into the support for derision of whole categories of person and the opportunity to spread more and more and more lies. And there's a moment at the end of the book when the story, the plot are done, at least for the nonce until the third part of this trilogy appears, when you talk about the current conjuncture. In this case, it's really writing about what is happening still in Gaza. But I wondered if you could reflect partly on putting that into the book, albeit as an epilogue, but also on what is happening with these bastards who run Meta, who run X, etc.
Yeah, I think it's much trickier today because I think it's a sort of two-pronged attack.
Mhm.
One is spreading lies and disinformation, but really chaos, and that has both a military and an informational aspect to it. So the thing is how to spread chaos as quickly as possible, so that there'll never be any such thing as truth. It can never be gotten to, whatever. That's one thing. But on the other hand, good old repression is back too, because when people really do start to speak up and try to use some of these channels, then they get locked out or they get repressed, like the students last spring. And then what? By the way, I have an article now which talks a bit more extensively about the new repression and what happened in the fall when people came back to campus. It was really very horrible. The crackdown, they were not tolerating any sort of expression in favor of Gaza. It was going to be all shut up. And they did a quite stunning job of kind of locking up, dissent. And that's pretty scary also, that when you really do have something to say, when you really are dissenting against the war machine, against the empire, they can silence you in that way. And so if you take X, for example, can work in two ways. X can work as just flooding the airwaves with crap,
Mm.
but, well, let's say it works in three ways. One, flooding the airwaves with crap. Two, as a contested space, and it is still a contested space because Elon still, he will have to go some ways before he starts closing it off. But three, if you really challenge Elon, then you'll get censored on X. So, you know, so two out of the three are not good, you know. So, and the third is what's left to us, you know, kind
Right.
of, and we just hope that Daddy Elon doesn't get too mad at us, you know.
Now, if you think about two of the greatest writers in the English language, Dashiell Hammett, or as Lillian Hellman said on Dick Cavett, Dashiell Hammett, and Raymond Chandler, the people after Shakespeare who truly improved English in a massive way, what's left is the code. And this is not the production code per Hollywood. This is the hard-boiled code, the notion of a certain almost elegiac knightly quality to hard-bitten police slash private detectives about how you should treat people, because everything else is just encouraging cynicism, desperation, and utilitarianism. What's Harry's code?
Chandler put it best, down these streets walks a man, and I would add also a woman, because we're also talking about Crystal, walks a man and a woman who are not themselves mean.
Yeah.
So it is Chandler's code. In the end, Harry will bend laws, but he won't bend ones that will harm people.
Mm.
And he's not above larceny if it's in a good cause. He's not above breaking and entering if it's in a good cause. He's not above blackmail if it's in a good cause, but only if it's in the cause of his clients, who are generally the downtrodden and the woebegone, who he's standing up for. So that's what he does. And Crystal, who's a working class girl, has that real working class sentiment, and she
Mm.
also isn't very much fooled by Harry, who she thinks is somewhat full of himself, and she enjoys talking back to him, but also she learns from him, and they do cooperate together. And she's very, very smart and very good at learning on the sly. And
I
now we
guess
have two other women, which is Lynn, who is the Chinese girl, who has this fake Chinese argot, may not understand English well, and of course she speaks perfectly fluid English, but everyone expects her to speak like she's in a Charlie Chan movie, and so she does in terms of trying to fool people. And there's now Ninan, also the kind of Cuban Mexican Spitfire, So they actually form an alliance, and they go after what turns out to be a trafficking network, in Hollywood, and which culminates in a kind of Eyes Wide Shut scene.
I guess one of the things about women in hard-boiled fiction and noir, and I hope you don't mind my putting your brilliant novel in that category,
That's where it belongs.
is that there is the stereotype of the femme fatale,
Yeah.
beautiful, alluring, clever, sophisticated, sometimes proletarian, but above all, untrustworthy.
Yes.
And you can see this in some of Hammett and Chandler, but that's not true of all their female characters. But you can see it in a lot of trashier versions of them.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
And you're writing at a time and with a politics of your own that is committed to a less cynical, less misogynistic worldview, I think it's fair to say. And
Yes. So yeah, I mean, so there aren't that many femme fatales in my novels. There is one in the next one, actually.
okay.
She's an actress, and it turned out she worked in the porn industry, and now she's an actress in Hollywood, and she'll do anything to keep anyone from finding out her secret.
About
And
her
that's a little
past.
different from Chandler. But even there, we learned that in the end, she's not that. She's not what you think she is. But anyway, but yeah, there's not that many. And when I wrote my book, the first book was about film noir. It's called Film Noir: American Workers in Post-War Hollywood. And
Yeah.
I presented a kind of alternative. First of all, I enjoy the feminist, description of the femme fatale, women who are driven back into the house to doing, housework after World War II, after being in the factories, and these are the women who rebelled against it, and I enjoy their rebellion,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, but I the part about them doing the man wrong, I don't sort of go along with, and I think there are many examples in film noir where that's not the case, and where what you have is, or what you get to, is male-female class alliances, and that's what I'm more interested in portraying. Like Crystal in this book, the guy who she is representing is a Mexican, and they're trying to get his house from him in Torrance, so they can build, and they're just trying to erase him. And she has a good deal of sympathy for him. She comes from a real working class background, a rural background in Georgia. So, and Harry sees something in her too, and she can play the femme fatale, and she does often, but she knows that she's playing it, and she's
yeah.
playing it, and she's maneuvering, and she's manipulating, but she's manipulating in the cause of, often, of defending her client. So it's different.
Sure. And of course, the other thing is that often the femme fatale has to be that because of the social circumstances she faces.
Right.
But frankly, she outwits doofus dudes time and again. Think of Babs versus Fred McMurray in Double Indemnity, where Fred is a doofus.
He never knows, even in the end, what the hell's going on.
No, he's just waiting to get his trousers refitted for my three sons, I think.
Yes.
So,
I think we talked this last time, but Fred McMurray said the only two roles he hated in
that's
his
right.
career were that and Pushover, which are the only two good roles in his career. So don't trust Fred McMurray when he talks about movies. Actually, I think it's the moral there.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry to take us back. Uh, Dennis, I wanted to ask you a question about readership, and it's it's a double-barreled question. The first part is, whom are you imagining when you write? Who are we, the people you write for? And secondly, away from your own imaginative powers, what do you know about who reads the books?
Well, okay. It does have a pretty good scholarly readership, because I asked a bunch of people, you included, and a couple of other people, British writers, to look at the book, and they were really taken with it.
Mm.
So everyone I've asked in the academic community who's near noir, or does is more in the, let's say, not fringes, but more in the oh, more adversarial, let's say, or slightly adversarial, likes the book. I'm hoping that everyone who's slightly adversarial to the system likes the book. That's the audience that I'm reaching for, and I'm trying to be as appealing to everyone as I can.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of what you're doing here, in terms of the difference between critical writing and this kind of writing, is you're translating. You're translating from,
Mm.
not necessarily, you can put a lot of theory in a novel. You just can't put it in a novel in the language of theory. You have to do it on the sly, and you have to do it with the characters expressing it. So that's the challenge, in a way. And I find that to be quite fun, actually, to tell you the truth. So, yeah, hopefully this will have a wide audience. The others have had some audience, and I'm hoping it increases. I'm doing a number of podcasts for this book, so I'm hoping to reach a podcast audience. It does seem to have struck a chord so far, because, and two things. One is the sort of, well, I think there's a sort of left chord around, we are entering a kind of dark ages, as you
Mm.
you alluded to, just in terms of repression, in terms of the power of the empire. But then, aside from that, there's also, we're entering a dark ages because of Trump. And because of, now we're finding out that not a single thing he said on the campaign trail was true. You know, he just turned out to be a better liar than Harris, and Harris is a pretty good liar. So it's kind of, so it's not surprising. The head of his office of man. Oh, Trump had said that he didn't know anything about what Century 25 was about. And the guy who's the head of the Office of Management and Budget, who he's appointed, it has the Office of Management and Budget, who will be implementing this stuff, is the writer of the century of the 20th century 25. So he must have found out afterwards. It's wild, somebody must have just told him after,
I'm just glad he's taking back what's ours in the Panama Canal, Dennis, and that he's shaking up those NATO guys by telling those indigenous people in Greenland a thing or two.
Yes,
Damn it.
yeah, it's too bad there's no minerals in Greenland, that he just wants it for the snow. Uh,
Absolutely.
and
And also it's a way of setting up an outpost for the Russians so that they can find out what NATO's doing. I think that's the other interest that, but
And of
also,
course, yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
they want that, so they want the gateways to keep commerce flowing because the BRICS countries are an actual, have thrown down the gauntlet or maybe have, in front of them, in terms of their own trade. So what does he want? The Panama Canal and Greenland. And why the other reason he wants Greenland, other than for the minerals, is he wants the access to the Arctic, and he wants that Arctic Trail, which is fast, which may be faster than going to the south.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's looking to, that's what they're, if you look at the where are the minds of the American ruling class, they want these things.
Absolutely. And similarly, his bitching about NATO's contributions to the military are exactly what Biden and Obama and Clinton and all these hacks have called for.
Well, and also it is what do you call it? It's a gangster sort of thing. It's protection. It's a protection racket. So that and so like you better contribute 5%, or you never
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
where the bombs could start dropping next. And the other thing is, of the 5%, 4% will go into the coffers of the American military, arms manufacturers. So it's just all he's asking is a blatant redistribution of wealth from the Europeans to the Americans,
Yeah.
and it is blatant.
I guess my thing is, and getting back to Harry,
Yep.
which would Harry prefer? The supposedly benign, but in fact imperial technocrats of a Clinton, an Obama, or a Biden, or the gangster-like infantile behavior of Trump, when in policy terms, when it comes to international politics, there's, to use language Harry would not consider, a bee's dick of difference between them.
There's not, and Harry would probably like that phrase if he heard it. So yes, there's not. In foreign policy, there's a complete consensus, you know. Yeah, I think Harry would be interested in exposing both of them, to tell you the truth.
Mm,
Would
mm.
probably start out thinking Trump is really gross and, follow through on that. But then he would probably find that, in fact, the Democrats are just as gross. And that's what he's finding out in this thing. And in fact,
I,
there's a chapter about liberals, and he goes to see the producer who is the liberal in Hollywood at the moment, who, I mean, it has a false name, but you will recognize him. He's very, very prominent. And and the guy says, look, I'm totally independent of the studios. They don't have any weight on me. There's nothing that I do what I want, and I do whatever I want. And then his secretary comes in and says, "Oh, Fox is on the line for you. They said they're waiting that you can sign the $250,000 contract whenever you'd like." And that's what he did at this moment. He went into the studio and he signed a three-picture deal. And Harry says, I'd seen him crumble from, the high independent to someone who was absolutely, scared and who was just going to follow what they were doing. And at the end of the chapter, he says, I just about had it with liberals. I never wanted to talk to another liberal again.
one of the interesting aspects to this is that, of course, in those days, the studios were still run in some cases by the original founders,
Yeah,
many of whom were uh, of Russian Jewish origin who had been refugees
right.
from the pogroms.
Mhm.
And many of the leftists they were hunting down were also of Jewish background, but
Yeah,
came from a different position politically. And so there is this awkward subtext whenever we discuss Hollywood. Awkward sometimes for the left, awkward sometimes for Jewish folks, awkward for the right, especially the pro-Israel right today, of the slur of Jewish control of the media.
yeah, exactly. Yes, well, that's a far right conspiracy, but in Hollywood, yeah, I mean that both mostly the strongest way that that comes out is when this writer or Saul Ortel, this Jewish writer, is in front of the committee, and the guy says, there are good Jews in Hollywood, Adolf Zucker, and he names the six studio heads who are Jewish, and he says, and there's a plague, there's a curse going on now because we've also seen in L.A. County more and more white men marrying Jewish women. Where is this going to go to? Will you please help us, rid L.A. County of this infestation? And Saul Hartel gets up and says, finally, he couldn't decide if he was going to testify or not. He said, look, I'm a union member, I'm an American, and I'm a Jew. I can't be an American or a union member without being a Jew. And there is a thing in Jewish folklore which says that there is no one so dishonored as someone who rattles and tattles on his fellows, and I will not be that person. So yes, there were, as I hate to say it, but there were good Jews and bad Jews, but it was a class difference, you
Yeah.
know, and it was a class difference, although, some of the writers were, they always get accused of being, swimming pool socialists, but they really did use their money for good. They were union organizers. They were really in the forefront of supporting black struggles. So it was kind of like, yeah, they were the menace, and yeah, so there it is a tricky thing, but I think it's also not good to get confused that there is a class difference here that's going on in a class war that's being waged by one segment with but that's not the main person. The main people are those behind them, the Anglo bankers, you know against another segment of the Jewish population.
And fascists who are Catholic, like Joe Kennedy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. They just want to, they're just in favor of a pogrom, damn it. And, like,
So I want to ask you a slightly personal question, Dennis, and by all means, don't proceed with this. The great Lebanese Australian novelist and poet David Malouf once said that everyone's first novel is personal and rather about themselves. And you have to get that out of your system. Maybe it means publishing it. Maybe it means not publishing it. Maybe it means it can't get published. Where are you and Harry? Are you guys on a continuum?
I'm often asked this, and I often watch writers. It's a real quandary for writers, what he's pointing to, novelists, am I going to be recognized, kind of thing, and what if I am, well, one of the answers is, well, what if you are? You're writing a novel. So, you can always say it's a novel. But, for me, I didn't get it out of my system after the first book, every book. And that's a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a moment in the next book where Harry has a very surprising moment where, he's doesn't have really relationships, and he's found one with this actress who he meets in this book. And eventually he goes back to her, and he thinks that, and he sleeps with her. And he thinks that's horrible because every time he's ever slept with anyone, he's generally left them and it's generally turned out horribly. And the therapist who he goes to see, Dr. Kellman, who was trained by Freud, says, no, no, you did the right thing. You're on a good track. And Harry says, what? What are you talking about? I would never have thought that at all. Oh my God. Then he gets very scared. So I don't know, these things, some of these things are near and dear to my heart. I won't say how near and dear or whatever, but I think you're always writing from your personal experience, but with the cloak of genre. And
And of course, some of that personal experience is ethnographic and historical,
right.
sometimes more than it is autobiographical.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
You write about places that you know, and a lot of the writing occurs when you go back to them physically to be there, and you have a strong historical sense from a period before you were present.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
I think that's one of the keys to the success. I guess, obviously
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, as they always say about, write about what you know. So when I was starting this series, I thought, write about what I know. I really don't know anything. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I know Hollywood in the 40s. That's what I know. Something that isn't real and happened before I was even born. That's what I know best. So that's what I write about.
Well, funnily enough, that relates to my next question I was going to ask Dennis. And it's about the fact that the so-called classical Hollywood cinema, which people tend to date from the mid-20s through to the mid-40s, but you could take it on into the 50s. For many of us, is the acme of vertically integrated, cartel-like industrialism. But for many of us, it's never been matched. And it's never been matched often in terms of its cheap genres. The things that did not necessarily feature big stars, but were sometimes made at night to take advantage of a 24-hour clock, but that many of us regard as extraordinary classics. I wondered if you could comment on that, and what is it about the art of this pressure, this work, like the pressure that Dickens experienced in putting together little stories that became novels, or Chandler perhaps most famously did in writing little stories that were eventually, most of them, clipped together to make novels. So I'm asking you to step away a little bit from our normal focus of the cultural politics of a thing to talk about aesthetics, which can still be political, but aesthetics in terms of what you regard as high quality, when at the time it wasn't promoted or thought of in quite that way.
Um, you know, um, okay, let's see. First of all, Chandler, those short stories were part of the pulps. So Chandler started out in this very low grade, the lowest grade, and then finished up with, actual literature. So and it came from those humble beginnings. For me, the genre films that are the most interesting, the Hollywood B films and the crime films of the 40s and 50s, what makes them what the opening, the freedom is because there's less money involved.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not the big budget thing. And you can see sometimes you watch these big budget spectaculars, twisting and turning, and you watch them nowadays too, where they have tons of writers and you see the script going through, whatever. And it's torture to watch it. I was thinking about the Golden Globes. What is her name? The woman who's all the talk of the town now, who did the Golden Globes thing, who did the Tom Brady roast. You know, that roast is 14 minutes of unbelievable comedy. But when she went to do the Golden Globes, all of a sudden she got nervous. She got writers. She tried out every joke, and you end up not with Ricky Gervais's very brilliant monologues, but with something that's much tamer, actually, And that's a difference between, in a way, a kind of B film where you can where you can express yourself a little more and where it's not being looked at so carefully, and an A film which is being looked at very, very carefully.
So this is Nikki Glaser. You're,
Nikki Glaser, yeah, yeah.
I think,
So if you
yeah.
see the Golden Globes is not that good. There's a couple of good jokes in it, but she worked, it was too worked over. All of a sudden she became the star. Here she is in this big budget A-list moment, and it shows, it's not the same. It's not the same. You see that time and time again, happening. And yeah, I'm watching Preminger's movies now.
Mhm.
So Preminger did a film in 1931 in Vienna. I just came back from Vienna, so I like to think about it. And it was called the Grosse Liebe, the Good Life, and it's a very class conscious film, actually. Really, really interesting about a war hero who comes home, gets mistaken for this mother's son, gets involved with this woman. It's a screwball comedy, but it's much more class conscious because later in 37 he does another screwball comedy called Danger, Love at Work, with Ann Jordan and with Jack Haley, who was 2 years later to play the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. But it's different. It's funny. It's got Edward Everett Horton in it, so it has to be funny. But it's funny, and Ann Southern is wonderful in it, and Jack Haley's okay. But you know what? It turns out in the end, as a screwball comedy, that both of them turn out to be rich. So where's the class? Where's the class difference here? It's extinguished
Well,
at the.
I think of My Man Godfrey, which at one level does the same thing because the Bill Powell character turns out to be from the ruling class. But it is a great New Deal picture, not only for its fabulous acting, great female roles, and Bill Powell, always fabulous, but also because it refers to these homeless guys living on this dump as forgotten men. And the theme about them is redemption, but not redemption from them. They're not fallen, they're forgotten, and bringing them back into discourse. I've been writing recently about plans for the 2028 Olympics in LA.
Mm.
Heaven
Boy,
knows what the cost of those will be now,
yeah.
given whatever facilities are destroyed by this horror that's going on even as we speak. But, last count, 45,000
Or
forgotten.
maybe the demolition costs will be less. You never know.
Yeah,
You know,
quite.
you know.
45,000 forgotten children, women, and men in Los Angeles, last count, homeless people.
Yeah.
And it's that extraordinary class differential that, of course, is modulated through other things like wartime trauma, illness, mental and otherwise, that is the backdrop to our beloved, benighted city. And I guess getting back to where we began, it's pure coincidence that we're speaking about your wonderful books and your wonderful latest novel at this moment of possibly LA's greatest crisis at a visceral level. And it's not the big one in terms of the long expected horrific earthquake. We can only hope that doesn't happen now. But is there a way, is there something beyond the graceless antinomy, Dennis, of LA as place of disaster versus place of fantasy?
For me, where I always look is where are the outsiders? So in each book, it takes the cause of African Americans. In the second book, what kind of culture do they have? What do they contribute? How is that LA? How is that LA different than what we look at? In the third book, it's Mexican Americans. In this book, it's the writers on the outside being pursued as communists. So I always see that there's a real, Mike Davis was really the champion of this,
Mm.
other LA, which he always talked about. I hate to say it, but when Frederick Jameson did his, tour through the, what was it called? The hotel, in LA,
Bonaventura Hotel.
Bonaventura Hotel. Mike Davis then wrote, you take one step outside of the Bonaventura Hotel and you're faced with all of the class differences in LA. And I have to say, I was at an SCMS conference in 2010 and we took like 3 steps outside and we go through this tunnel and we're in a completely different LA. So my books, they always, you have to recount the power structure. It's very important that it be understood, and Harry always gets involved with it. But you also have to count the vibrant LA underneath, and that's the one that I and Harry kind of always champion.
Beautifully said. The other thing about the Jameson bullshit is that I didn't understand all these colored lines. Dude, go to a hospital, go to a hotel, go to any big institution, many of them predating your little trip. Um, Dennis, to wind things up, I just want to know if there's anything you would like to add to what we've discussed. And that might be, as we said before, retreading ground that we've covered today, or it might be something entirely different with reference to this fantastic second novel in this latest trilogy, The Dark Ages.
Well, you know what? This does not relate to it exactly, but in Vienna we went to see Wicked in 3D, okay, which I call timid or limp. That is Hollywood is cheering itself about this wonderful film that they've done. At the Golden Globes, you saw that table, with the blazingly neutral Jeff Goldblum, who just really is the essence of nothingness and who wallows in it. And you see this film, which for a while was interesting, I thought. I thought the high point was when the good witch says to the bad witch, come along with me, and they get on the train together. From there, I felt it was really downhill. First of all, it turned into a Marvel movie because it turned out to be how she became the bad witch, how she got her broomstick, how she got her flying monkeys, and as a friend of mine pointed out, it's actually the other way around, but she deserts her friend. So she doesn't, so the thing, so I didn't find that in the end, I found this sort of liberal hodgepodge, not being anything, and of course the thing about it is the color coding of the Green Witch, right? So that's where it lies. Okay, so I went home from that disappointed, and the next day on YouTube I watched Beyonce in Texas doing Cowboy Carter, and I thought, what a difference this is. She inhabits this white space and she makes it black. It's
Mm.
such a different thing, and it's such a bold thing, and it's everything that I want to say, liberal, limpid, wicked isn't, you know. And the way that she inhabited it is extraordinary. And of course, for that she received zero country western nominations for best album, but she did receive the Grammy nomination for best album, and she received 11 nominations and was at the height. And that show is just extraordinary. She changes the words to the Dolly Parton song Jolene, and she makes it much more big and bold. She comes in on this horse. She's sort of part Joan of Arc, part Lady Godiva. I mean, it's extraordinary. And then the black, dancers, cowboys, and cowgirls. I just thought, wow, what a difference in terms of really inhabiting the space versus the mealy mouthed, sort of Hollywood equivalent, which really doesn't go anywhere except for Hollywood to clap itself on the back and say, oh my God, and there's a part two. That's what they're cheering for a part two.
Dennis Broe, thank you so, so much for being with us. And
Now,
when
just one thing, how does that relate to Harry? I think Harry would have detected that also. And Harry, who loves, rhythm and blues, I think would love what Beyonce did to country western.
Mhm. Great chatting to you, my friend. And can I extract a promise from you in extractivist mode that when the next one comes out, you'll return to the pod and share with us, without giving away too many secrets, what goes on in the porn industry in Hollywood?
Yes, as soon as I find out, haha, of course we all know, but yes, yes, for sure.
Lovely. Thanks, Dave.